Hi everyone, it's Niamh here and welcome to my art journaling channel. Today we're going to be playing with the new Tim Holtz Distress Glaze embossing powders to create really grungy cards. So I'm starting off with a piece of corrugated card, and I'm just using a skewer to pull off some little bits and pieces to make it look really sort of grungy. I'm then applying some crackle paste, texture paste, and some grit paste. So this is going to apply a sort of grungy textured area to my piece of cardboard and the substrate that I'm using. Now with these, it's really good if you leave them for a little while. I left those ones that I'm working on right now about half an hour. You can dry it with using your heat gun, but the crackle actually works better if you leave it to dry naturally. Once they're all dry, I'm just going in with a little bit of gesso just to cover up the bare pieces of cardboard. If I miss a bit, that's fine because it's supposed to look a little bit grungy, but I want to have mostly a base coat. Now the reason for that is I'm using the Distress Glaze embossing powders, and they're a translucent embossing powder. So if I put them over the craft card, you're not actually going to see the colours very well. They need to have a white base for the colours to show up. And I wanted to do a sort of marbled coloured effect over the top, so I needed to have those colours showing. With an embossing ink pad, or I've got the embossing dabber there, I've just dabbed it all over the surface, and now I'm just going with a whole range of colours. I think I've got walnut stain, ground espresso, peeled paint, I think, just a whole mix of them, and I'm just sprinkling it onto the surface. You can see I've got some lumpy bits, I've got some quite fine bits. Obviously the more you put on, the darker the colour is going to be, or it's not opaque, but it's not as translucent. You can see the bits that have gone on really lightly are more water-like, so it's really sort of spread out the pigment. And then you just heat it up until it's melted or shiny. So with the embossing glaze, you can actually, with the embossing ink, you can actually do a few at a time, especially since I'm using a really low blowing heat tool on this, so it's not blowing everywhere. If you had a really powerful heat tool, you may find the ink dries too much and stuff starts blowing off. But with this one, it heats it fairly gradually and it doesn't blow it around too much. You can still see me moving my heat gun around to see if it's melted, but the powder itself is not moving anywhere too fast. Now, you can see I applied more embossing powder to that top one, or the first one I did, but it really depends on how you're going to do it or what effect you want to get. To make this look more like a verdigris type effect, I'm adding some copper paint. So I'm just watering down some acrylic paint and brushing onto the surface, and then I'm using wet wipe to wipe it away. Now the embossing glaze acts as a resist because it's obviously a plasticky surface, and I can wipe away the acrylic paint before it dries. If you leave the acrylic paint to dry on the surface, it will be permanent, so you do need to wipe it away while it's still damp. Now I'm just going in with an ink pad around the edges to give some definition, and again that adds some of that extra blackness in and grunginess to my page. So this is a really cool background textured piece to do to anything. You can do this on the cardboard like I've just done, and the great thing about it is from recycled box you come up with this really cool panel that looks, you sort of wonder what it actually is. It's hard to sort of work out what's happened to it when you look up at it nice and close. And because the embossing glaze is transparent, you can actually see some of the crackle and the texture through it. So you're not covering that over, you can still see that crackle. That's why I actually used the crackle paste. To put these cards together, I'm just using some vintage text. It's from an old dictionary, and I'm just inking up the edges of my craft cardstock and my vintage text, just using walnut stain I think, and going around all the cards and doing that. Now you can do this in any way you want, using any ink pad you want. I quite like the browns, but you could sort of pick up on the green tones I suppose if you would like to as well. I'm blending off the glass onto my ink pad, or onto my cardboard, sorry. I find that gives me a smoother blend. If you want something slightly harsh, you can just put the ink pad straight on it. There's no right or wrong way to do it, but it just gives you this sort of nice blended effect. Now I'm just going in and gluing everything together. That's basically a PVA glue that I'm using to glue everything down. You could use a glue stick or double-sided tape to do that, so it's just whatever your choice of adhesive is. Once I've glued all the cards down, again, this is where you can sort of go your own way, I suppose. I'm choosing to, because it's kind of vintagey and grungy, I'm using these paper dolls. These are actually the baseboard dolls, so they're actually a little bit thicker. So these cards have quite a lot of dimension because the cardboard that I did all the embossing on is quite thick, and again it's got the texture paste on top of it as well. With the figures that I'm going around, I'm actually going around with a black permanent marker around the outsides just to hide the edge and to define it a little bit. It gives it a shadow and pops it up off the page. So I was using the same glue to glue these down onto the backgrounds, but that PVA glue doesn't really adhere very well to plasticky surfaces. So I'm actually changing tune, and I'm using the Dina Wakley Ultra Thick gloss medium, gel medium, sorry, which glues down anything. It'll glue down metal embellishments and all sorts. So it's a really good one for thicker embellishments. It works really well. These beautiful little chipboards are from Scrap FX, and they're fabulous. They come in a small size like this. They actually come in a much larger size as well, and they have live, love your life, laugh as much as you breathe. So they've got the large word at the top and then a little saying etched into the bottom. Now I would like to emboss those, but because the bottom piece actually has the words etched in, it makes it quite difficult to see, because obviously the embossing powder will cover that. So instead of embossing it, I've actually used gold wax to rub over the top, and again I've been really light with it. The laugh that you see that I've put on the little ballerina who's actually laughing, I had to cut off that little bottom piece because I actually rubbed the wax on too hard and it filled in the little words. You just couldn't see it anymore. So you do need to be fairly gentle when you're putting that together. So here's a close-up of the final cards. They're lots of fun to do. That textured background is really easy to do, but it just gives you such a beautiful effect. And you can see I've done the same technique on each of these pieces, but they all look completely different. And obviously the great thing about the embossing glazes is they do come in a different range. I use sort of browns, blacks, greens to get a really verdigris wood type effect, but you could use the reds and blues and yellows and so on to get some really interesting effects as well. So I do hope you have a go at playing with these. They're a new product that are lots of fun to play with, and of course with the beautiful Scrap FX chipboard shapes as well. They just match made in heaven. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, bye for now.